Well, I forgot to go through and fold my pages up, so my pages may stick together. Before I forget, next week is our last lesson for this year. For this year! I'll see you next year. That's just like, wow, already. And Lord willing, we will jump into Joseph beginning in January, and we'll finish Genesis next spring. I've been on it 2 years. So we'll see, Lord willing. So as I was writing your lessons, particular during the summer, and I was looking ahead to this chapter, I never really gave it much thought, actually, other than it seemed a bit odd to stick an incident like this into the story of Jacob. I'm like, why is that even there? And I really didn't see a reason for it to be there. It just seemed really odd that it was there. And it just off the top of my head, as I was writing your questions, I thought it showed Jacob to be weak, letting his sons dictate the events. And I even asked in your questions, why did Jacob keep silent when he'd never kept silent before? That was never one of his strong points. But as I've studied this chapter, I've seen that there is so much more here than meets the eye. And I guess we could actually say that about every chapter we've studied. But in this case, the more that meets the eye is far-reaching. Even, I think it reaches even down to our own day. So let me ask you this first before I go ahead. What did you think about this chapter? I know we've kind of changed up the way we do things, but what did you think about this chapter being stuck in the middle of the history of Jacob? Jacob's daughter, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, is raped. What was your thoughts? What's the reason? Yeah. Anything that struck you as you was reading?
Well, sin never makes more sin right.
True. Sin never makes more sin right. Yeah. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Yeah.
It's going to be hard for there ever to be trust between them, those tribes, or any kind of bond in a good way.
Yeah.
Between them.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Well, I'll tell you what came to my mind as I was reading this. I started making my notes, and I thought what came to my mind was, I don't think we've had a more timely chapter than this one. And you may think, are we talking about the same chapter here? I think this chapter fits with today. And let me explain why. What came to my mind as I was studying this chapter, and this wasn't in any of the commentaries, and the reason that it wasn't is because it's too new to be in any of the commentaries. It's too recent. So let me know what you think about this. In speaking of this chapter, just this chapter, look at what happened in this chapter. Something atrocious happened, as verse 7 says, in Israel. Then the sons of Israel retaliated far beyond the original act of violence. Does that remind you of any current event?
Every day.
Well, every day, but what about October the 7th, 2023? Is that not exactly a picture of what happened here? The Hamas attack on Israel on October the 7th of 2023 was one of the most horrible things to happen since the Holocaust. But how did Israel retaliate? The world has said that Israel has gone too far, right? Is that not what we see? Too much, too far. And the world, including many conservative Christians, are turning against the Jews. And I thought, this is an exact picture of what happened on October the 7th. How these sons retaliated is exactly how the world is viewing how the Jews have retaliated against Hamas, against Iran, against Hezbollah, against all the others. They've gone too much, too far.
Not making little of it, but he didn't kill her. I mean, he raped her, which was bad.
Yeah. You're right. No, that's exactly right. Yeah, October the 7th was far worse. There were many that were killed and taken hostage. But you're exactly right. When you look at the balance or the ratio, maybe is a good way to put it, of what they did to her, that was bad. It was horrible. But what they did seemed to be over the top.
They killed the whole
They killed all the men.
whole town.
Yeah, exactly. And the more I thought about that, the more I saw that connection. Zechariah 12 tells us that at the time of the end, just before the tribulation, or the time of Jacob's trouble, as Jeremiah calls it, the whole world will turn against Jerusalem. And we're seeing that happen. Now, I've heard pastors say in preaching about Zechariah 12, they said, well, yeah, America's got to be taken out of the picture by then, because America will always stand by Israel. Really? Are you seeing signs of that changing in our culture? Even very conservative Christians are beginning to turn against the Jews. I don't see that as being far-fetched at all. But let me ask you this. Taking all of Israel's history, I mean from here in Genesis to where we are today, has Israel ever done it right? Have they ever followed the Lord obediently and wholeheartedly? Can you think of any time in their history when they have wholeheartedly obeyed and followed the Lord?
Some have tried harder than others.
Yeah, some have tried hard. I think the closest they ever came was to what we would call the Joshua generation. After the Moses generation died out, and that second, the 40-year-old and younger were the only ones that got to go into the promised land, except for Joshua and Caleb. That was the closest, but even at that, there were many that didn't. Now, we've seen through Scripture that there's always been a remnant, as you said. Some tried harder than others. There's always been a remnant who did, but never as a whole nation. But they will by the end of the tribulation. So throughout the Scriptures, the Israelites and the Jews have been called a stiff-necked people. In Deuteronomy 9 verse 6, Moses said, therefore understand that Jehovah your God does not give you this good land. They're getting ready to go into the promised land. Jehovah your God does not give you this good land to possess it for your righteousness. It's not because you're good enough, for you are a stiff-necked people. In Chronicles, I didn't write that down, 2 Chronicles. In 2 Chronicles 30 verse 8, Hezekiah was the king. The northern kingdom had already been taken into exile. Assyria was breathing down the neck of Judah, and Hezekiah said, and do not be stiff-necked like your fathers. Yield yourselves to Jehovah and enter into his temple, which he has sanctified forever, and serve Jehovah your God, so that the fierceness of his wrath may turn away from you. But they didn't. And of course, then Babylon came in and took them into captivity. And then in Acts chapter 7, verse 51, as our pastor read yesterday, as Stephen stood before the Sanhedrin, he also said, "O stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you always resist the Holy Spirit, as your fathers did, so you do too." They've never, as a whole, Israel has never gotten it right. They have never worshiped and served God wholeheartedly. But here's the thing. God has loved them. They were and they still are God's chosen people. They've never gotten it right. And God has always said, "You are my chosen people." God has never abandoned them, even when they went into exile. That famous scripture that people quote all the time, Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans for you for good and not for evil." No, that was being said to them as they were going into exile. God was saying, "I'll be right there with you. In the worst place you can be, I'll be right there with you." He has always been with them. They have always been His people. And in this chapter, well, actually, all the chapters concerning Jacob and his family are perfect examples of this. They didn't get it right. But God didn't say, "Oh, well, you're on your own now." He didn't say, "Oh, you went over the top. You're not my people anymore." No, they were still His people. We've said many times this is real history. But we can see how God gave them the free will to do what they wanted to do. But in that, He allowed things to happen that would ultimately bring about His will. He did then, and He still does today. So I don't want to take a lot of time with this. We can discuss it more at the end if we have time. But do you see now how this chapter fits perfectly with what's going on in the world today? Do you ever question, how do we support Israel when they do some of the things that they do? Has anybody said to you, how can you support Israel? Not directly. I've heard it. How can you possibly think that they're God's people when they do the things that they do?
But you just know that they are.
You just know that they are. And so are we. We don't always get it right. But yet God doesn't abandon us and kick us to the curb when we go over the top or we do things wrong. Well, as I've been studying this, some of the things that I've been reading and listening to, for those who preach or teach straight through the books of the Bible, many of them, you could tell that this was a kind of a hard chapter. Some of the commentaries they really had a hard time with this chapter. Even Andy Woods, whom I admire greatly, I was listening to his videos on it, he had a hard time with this chapter. What's interesting though, and I wish I had the opportunity to talk to him in person now, because he was on a trip to Israel when that happened. And he was preaching this back in 2023. So when he came back from that trip, that had just happened in Israel. And so he's preaching on this chapter. So it's almost like it was too close. It was too fresh in his mind to see that connection. I really would wonder if he sees that connection now. Because I think it's just a perfect connection to that. But he had a hard time with actually what do you say about this chapter? Many of the commentaries, as I said last time, simply retold the chapter, just basically paraphrased it. But again, I think this chapter is very valuable in view of prophecy. What will happen in Israel's future, to them it's prophecy. We look back on it as history. We can see in this chapter how what's a good word? not exactly orchestrated, but how it had a hand in some of the things that happened later in Israel's, to them, their future, but as we look back on it, things that happened in their history. There are many ways to approach this chapter. Several of the commentaries, as we've seen and we might expect, blame Jacob for even being there to start with. I mean, you could expect that. If he'd not stopped here, this would never have happened. If he'd gone on like he was supposed to, he would have never been here and this would have never happened. Wrong time, wrong place. It's all his fault for stopping there. Perhaps this specific thing would not have happened, but the family of Jacob, or Israel as it is now being called, was a minority tribe of people in the land of Canaan. You've got to remember that. When we think of Israel here in Scripture, we think of the 1,000,000-member tribe, that came out of captivity. No, when all of it took place about Joseph, and you know the story of the famine, and they end up down in Egypt because of the famine. When they go down there are only 70 of them. I mean, let that sink in a minute. Their entire clan, their entire tribe, their entire family consisted of 70 people. It's even less than that here because the sons are not married here and the sons don't have children here. So you could probably, count on your hands how many people are in the family here. Surprisingly, I didn't take time to do that, but you could do that. You could see exactly how many there are of them, and there are very, very few. But they are a minority. They're just a handful of people living in Canaan. If this had not happened here, if this incident had not have happened, something else would have happened somewhere else. They would have been attacked some other way. You think up many different scenarios of other things that could have happened to the family. If it hadn't have been this, it would have been something else because they were a minority of people. So let's examine it. In order to get the whole picture, we've got to go back to chapter 33, verse 18. So let's pick that up. So verse 33, verse 18 begins, "Now Jacob came safely to this," and I'm going to pronounce this Shechem, and I know it's probably Shechem, but that always reminds me of Shaquille O'Neal, so I'm not going to call it that. So I'm going to call it Shechem like we would here in East Tennessee. "Now Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan." And you got to get that picture. This city is in the land of Canaan. "When he came from Padan Aram, and he camped before the city. And he bought the piece of land where he pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And there he built this altar, erected an altar, and called it El Elohe Israel, which means the mighty God is the God of Israel. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land." So there you have the scene. The scene is set. Jacob and his family are finally in the back of Canaan, the land of his birth, as God directed him in Genesis 31:13. Now, Warren Wiersbe said that God had commanded Jacob when he went back to go to Bethel. But that's not what it says. He gave the scripture of chapter 31, verse 13, and I'm going to read that. What that said was, in the vision or the dream that he had, chapter 31, verse 13, what he saw was, God said, "I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, where you made a vow to me. Now arise, leave this land, and return to the land of your birth." It doesn't say go back to Bethel, unless God is referring to the land of your spiritual birth. That is sort of the place where he was reborn there. He had his birth, his spiritual birth there. But I don't think that's what it was. I think go back to the land, go back to Canaan. I don't think he was told to go back to Bethel. Best I could tell, he and Esau both were born in Hebron, where Isaac still lived at this time. But Canaan was the land of his birth. Now, as we said last time, we don't know how long he stayed in Sukkot. My opinion, as we talked about, why was he even there, and it had to do with the time of the year, my opinion was he just stayed there for the winter. If you have your map handy, I want to pull that out. But he stayed there, as we saw, that was in the flat land. It was in the warmest place. It was like we want to be tonight, in the warmest place, right there in the Jordan River Valley. It would get colder, but it certainly wouldn't get as cold as it would up here in Shechem, up on top of the mountain. So we don't know how long he stayed there. As I said, my opinion was that he just stayed there for the winter, and then he went on to Shechem, which you can see on your map. It's just north, just a little bit north of Bethel, and Hebron down here closer to the Dead Sea is where Isaac is living. Now, the New American Standard says he came safely to Shechem. The King James doesn't say safely, but some of the commentaries translated this as safe and sound, which fulfilled God's promise back in chapter 28 when he was there at Bethel to start with. God told him, I will bring you back to this land safely, or bring you back safely to this land. Not specifically to that place, but to this land. And it says then in verse 18 of chapter 33 that he camped or pitched his tent before the city. Now we read over that, okay, pitched his tent before the city. Well, don't think a whole lot about it. But that's a very important statement. To be before the city means he's not a part of the city. He's out in the outskirts. Jacob and his family were nomads. Arnold Fruchtenbaum said that ancient records show that the land of Canaan was comprised of city-states. All of these, every one of these, what we call cities, were actually city-states. They were independent little cities, each with their own form of government. Remember when Isaac and Rebekah went up to Gerar, and Abimelech was the king there, and he took Rebekah because he thought he told him, this is my sister. Well, just like when Abraham went down to Egypt and Pharaoh was there, every one of those little city-states had their own government. We know that back from chapter 14, well, it's not on this picture because Sodom and Gomorrah is gone, but back in chapter 14, Sodom and Gomorrah and every one of those 5 cities, Zoar, all of those had their own form of government. They had their own kings. All of these little city-states were that way. And so when it says he camped before the city, he was on the outside of that. All of them ruled generally by a patriarch, by a family. The patriarch of the family, and who was the king of that city. And then all these nomads, these people who went from place to place, lived around these cities, around the periphery. Many of them hoped to become citizens of those cities, like we saw with Lot. Remember back in chapter 13, it said he pitched his tent towards Sodom. He was in the outskirts, the periphery of Sodom. And then, of course, we saw later that he became a citizen of Sodom. So that's how all these little nomadic families and tribes would be. And they were all small, just like we said. They're just a few members in the family. So they moved with their animals, and they were from place to place. But to stay there, Jacob is going to stay, he thinks he's going to stay there for a while. His family, he and his family were outside the city. Likely they bought and sold or traded goods in the city. They were probably in and out of the city, but they were separate from the citizens of the city. Now, we know he was planning on staying there for a while because he bought a piece of property. But look at who he bought that property from. It says, verse 19, he bought it from the hand of the sons of Hamor, not from Shechem, but from some of Shechem's brothers, from the sons of Hamor. And then, but we know that he was planning on staying. Not only did he buy a piece of property, he created a place of worship. He built an altar. He was going to settle down there and stay there a while. But that was not where God wanted him to stay, but God gave him his free will to stay there, to settle down there. Now, we don't know how much time passed between verse 20 of chapter 33 and verse 1 of chapter 34. If it is simply what I would call a flow-through time, there's basically, maybe a few months, but no major amount of time. If it's a flow-through time, then I believe Dinah is somewhere between 10 and 12 years old, depending on when she was born. Now, we're not told, if you go back to when all these children were born, we're not told when within that 7-year time, that second set of 7 years, we're not told when she was born within that. You can sort of guess by the ones that are born before her that it's toward the end of those 7 years, but we don't know because those 4 women were having babies and, time was overlapping if babies were being born. Now, wait a minute, let me find my place here. All we know for sure is that she was Leah's last child. Now, many say that she was born at the same time of Joseph. Now, we do know when Joseph was born. We know that Joseph was born at the end of the 7 years because he was the last child to be born in Haran. He was born to Rachel, the only child born to Rachel yet. She's not had Benjamin yet. So he's the only child, and we know that he was born, let's see exactly how that's worded. Okay, verse 25 of chapter 30. Now it came about when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own place, to my own country. So we know that that's the end of the second set of 7 years. And we know later on in Genesis, we will know how old Joseph is. He's 17 years old when he goes in, when they sell him to Egypt. We know his age. But there are many commentaries that say that she was the same age of Joseph, was born at the same time. If that's possible, they would have only been somewhere around 6 or 7 years old when they left Haran. So there has to be a period of time between there. Several years between chapter 33 and 34. And most commentaries, actually, as you go through, that's probably the first thing that any commentary will tell you, how old she was at this point. And most of them give her age as anywhere between 13 and 16 years old. A mid to upper teenager. But we know that it can't be too awfully long because apparently none of these sons have wives yet. Now, if it's been long enough time for her to have been 14 to 16 years old, then those other sons are going to be up into their 20s. Or the earlier ones that were born are going to be up into their 20s. So they would have been seeking out wives or maybe already married at that time. We don't know, but we're just guessing this because apparently nothing is said about any of them having wives or any of them having children. But you remember that because of that treaty that Jacob had basically signed with Laban in chapter 31, none of them could go back to Haran again. None of the sons could go back to Haran to seek wives. They would have to find wives in Canaan somewhere. But apparently they hadn't sought wives here yet. So my thinking is it hasn't been too awfully long. As you read this, how old did you envision her to be? What, just off the top of your head, what did you think? How would you think she should have been?
I thought she had to be old enough to start looking womanly.
Yeah.
Young teenager.
Yeah.
So between 12 and 16 sounds
about right.
Would turn ahead.
Yeah, would turn ahead. Yeah.
Turn ahead.
Yeah.
think I thought about her age as much as I was thinking about those two boys. Thinking of what they did,
Yeah,
how old they were.
yeah.
But, cause I was thinking they might be just 18 or 19, but you're saying they're probably a little older.
Well, no, I'm just saying if she's older, they've got to be older.
Yeah.
But if they're 18 or 19, then that puts her younger. You see the connection there.
I was just thinking they were awful young to be so conniving.
Conniving and violent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Well, they married really early,
They did.
so I kind of lean toward 12, 13, something like that.
Yeah.
Simply for that reason.
Simply for that reason. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when we read these scriptures, whether we consciously think, well, she must have been such and such, you still have a thought of how old you think she is.
Conjure up a picture.
Yeah, exactly. So, as Elaine said, womanly, at least
Right.
old enough to turn ahead. Exactly. So that's the thought. So keep that in mind. I think because of our culture, we envision her to be that age, at least mid to late teenager. My opinion, and this is just strictly my opinion, is I think she's much younger. I think she's 10, 12 at the latest. But I'm thinking much younger because I think it's a flow through. I don't think there's a lot of years between this. And I'll explain to you why in a minute. But it says, verse 1 again, now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, remember she's got 6 sons and 1 daughter, whom she had born to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. Now we don't know if it was innocent. She just wanted to be around the other girls. Especially if she is very young, it could be very innocent. She just wanted to meet some of the other girls. Maybe her brothers or her dad, Jacob, had talked, or maybe even the women had talked about being in Shechem, the city of Shechem, and so she just wanted to see what the other girls were like. We don't know that. We don't know if it was a rebellious thing, if she was trying to sneak out to go, maybe to see the city where she'd been told not to go. We don't know that. There were some commentaries that said it was a rebellious act on her part, but we don't know that. Or Josephus, as Josephus put it, he said that she went to take part in a feast of the Shechemites. In other words, there was a party. And she wanted to go. Maybe she'd been told, you're too little, you're too young, you can't go. Maybe she did sneak out and go. We don't know. But at any rate, whatever caused it, whatever she went for, she is there. And while she was there, she caught the attention of someone. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her. So just hold it right there for a minute. He saw her. She attracted the attention of someone. And this, we learned that Hamor was a Hivite. Okay? Yeah, I've heard pastors try to be really cute in this, and they'll say, this ite and that ite and the other ite and the Perizzites and the Now, that's okay, but there's a reason. There's a reason for every one of these names. Some of them have to do with lineage, the Amorites and so forth, Ammonites and Moabites, all that has to do with lineage, whose family they belong to. But in some cases, it had to do with where they lived. The Hivites, apparently, from what I've found, the Hivites were a section of Canaanites that were more prone to live what we would call an urban life. They lived in cities. They didn't live out in the country land. They lived in cities. They were more city dwellers. And since Shechem is Hamor's son, and he's the prince of the city, that makes Hamor the patriarch or the king of the city. And it is likely that Shechem is the oldest son because the city is named after him. And by the way, as you read Scripture, this is one of the things that I hope really sinks in. I hope you make note of Shechem, because it is a very important city in Old Testament history. I was looking at some other things, and actually wasn't looking for Shechem. But as I was looking for other things, the city of Shechem kept showing up. I thought, well, that's interesting. And so I finally did a search on Shechem and found it's mentioned more than 60 times in the Old Testament, particularly in the book of Judges. It's all over the book of Judges. And as we said last week, it was really close to what later would be known as the city of Sychar in Samaria, where Jesus met the woman at the well. A well, by the way, that she said her ancestor Jacob dug. So that's a very important place. But think about this. How many books or movies or TV programs have a storyline that begins the way verse 2 begins? A young girl goes to a place she's not supposed to go, and she catches the eye of a rich or a famous or a well-to-do, influential, older man. You can see him in all the westerns. You can see him in all the modern movies. I mean, I was just thinking about that. I've seen this play out over and over and over again. And it almost always proceeds down the same path. So look at what happened. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and lay with her by force, the way the New American Standard reads. And when I read that, he saw her, he took her, he lay with her. He saw her, he wanted her, and he took her. I thought, how many times have I read that in Scripture?
Sound like King David, doesn't it?
Sounds like King David. But there are specific scriptures. You take Eve with the fruit. She saw it, she wanted it, she took it. Achan in the book of Joshua, after the battle of Jericho, he took some of the spoils, and he literally says, I saw it, I wanted it, I took it. 1 John 2:16, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. That plays out over and over and over. It's a common theme, and it's a pattern of sin. Any sin, every sin starts with a thought. I saw it, or I thought it, I wanted to do it, and I did it. That's every sin. It's the pattern of every sin. And Shechem saw her, he took her, and he lay with her by force. Now, some translations say that he defiled her. Other translations say that he humbled her. But we all know what it was. We all know exactly what happened there. He raped her. But then verse 3 says, and he was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl, and he spoke tenderly to her. And we're like, what? Wait a minute. What? But before we get too far along, we have to realize that Shechem's idea of love is far different than our idea of love. The culture at that time, now we know he's much older because he's the prince of the city. And if property was sold by brothers other than him, and he's the oldest brother, we know he's far older. And we will see later what kind of influence he has over every other man in the city. But he's older. And he says, but I love her. I want her. I took her. The culture at that time was that the Egyptians and the Canaanites regarded any unmarried woman or young girl as legitimate prey, or we might say fair game. You remember Pharaoh. Pharaoh wanted Sarah. He was told that she's Abraham's sister. And so he took her. It happened again with Abimelech, with Abraham and Sarah. It also happened to Isaac and Rebekah in chapter 26. And all three times that we have a record of it, An unattached female was fair game.
It's like the men were kind of heathen, wasn't
Yeah, that was the culture between the Egyptians and the Canaanite. Women were just property. Women were just, and it didn't matter the age. Now, in Sarah and Rebecca's age, they were both older, and as we know, were married. But it didn't have to be. The age didn't matter. So, look at verse 4. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this young girl for a wife." In that day, it was, as we've seen before, it was the patriarch who arranged the marriage. And you may have thought, I immediately thought, I put it in your lesson, it just like Samson in Judges chapter 4. Samson demanded that his father go and get the Philistine woman for his wife. But just like Samson, Shechem demanded. Now, the word there it's in the imperative. I looked that up. He demanded that his father get the marriage arranged. The girl, however, we will find out later, all during this time, is being kept prisoner in his house. He didn't rape her and then she went back home. He's got her locked up at his house or his palace, whatever it is. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound much like love to me. But now this is where our Bible translations differ. The King James Version refers to Dinah as a damsel, damsel in distress, but a damsel in both verses 3 and 4. But there's two different Hebrew words that are used there. It's different in each of those verses. The NIV calls her a young woman in verse 3, but calls her a girl in verse 4. So what does your translation say in verses 3 and 4? How is she referred to? Girl. Is it girl in both cases? Both verses?
3 and 4.
Uh-huh.
Mine it's girl.
Girl in both cases.
Mine's girl in verse 4, but I don't see in verse 3 where...
And he loved
her.
Her. Okay, it's just her. Okay.
Mine's young woman and girl.
Okay. In the New American Standard, it is called a girl, as I read in verse 3, and that's a word which means a female, can be a female from infancy to adolescence. Now, it's used more times to mean a girl of marriageable age, but it can be used from a baby to an adolescent. But then in verse 4, that word is a different word, and it is literally a young girl. Shechem spoke to his father, Hamor, and said, "Get me this young girl for a wife." Now that tells us, regardless of how old you think she is, that tells us right there that there's a huge age difference between him and her. And this is why I think she is only 10 or 12 years old. I think she's very young. She is a young girl. And again, this is where this incident in the Bible leaps into the 21st century. Because we know that the culture of our own day, other religions, particularly Islam, is that girls as young as 8 are being married. We read this, as we've said so many times, through American eyes, and we immediately think of everybody's marriageable age. He may be a lot older than her, but she's at least, a teen. No, it could very well be that she was very, very young. We're seeing that in our own world today. We're being exposed to that more and more of what we're seeing taking place in other countries, what's been taking place in some cities in our own country. But young girls as young as 8 are being married to these much, much older men. So that takes this, as I said, and puts this, what's happening here, into our own 21st century.
She is never, her thoughts, her feelings, expressions, they're never.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Never addressed.
No, never addressed. And I'm not sure, but I don't remember reading about her later on either. Who knows what that did to her?
Well, and that kind of makes you realize too, she was really young.
Really young. Yeah.
Because she didn't even have standing in the family to even utter a word yet. You know? So
yeah,
makes you think she was just really.
Yeah, I think she really was. But the fact that he wanted to marry her, well, it says there that back up in verse 3. He loved the girl. He spoke tenderly to her. That word says spoke to the heart. That meant in his mind he was speaking tenderly to her. That may have not been. She was too traumatized or frightened to even hear what he was saying. But the fact that he wanted to marry her simply meant that he didn't want her to get away. He said, verse 4 again, get me this young girl for a wife. Love and marriage, as you and I think of it, had nothing to do with this. He simply wanted her. So verse 5 then takes place in the meanwhile. Jacob heard about it. Maybe a servant came back and told him. We don't know how he heard, but some way the word got back to him. Jacob heard that Shechem had, my translation said, had defiled Dinah. One of the translations for this word defiled is the word contaminated. He had contaminated her in Jacob's eyes. You know, when you read about sexual attacks like that, one of the things that you read about is how the people will say how it made them feel dirty. She felt contaminated. He had contaminated Dinah, his daughter. That's the way Jacob looked at it. But his sons weren't there. His sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob kept silent until they came in. So why didn't Jacob act? Why didn't he? I mean, he's never been silent before. Why did he stay silent now?
One of my questions.
It doesn't tell us.
It doesn't tell us. But you think about how he's much, much older now. He's by himself now. He's alone and perhaps beginning to defer some to his son. So he doesn't do anything. And so Hamor, and apparently Shechem is with him, as we'll see in a minute, they go out to talk with Jacob. And Shechem wants to make sure, I think, that his father gets it done. And so verses 6 and 7, then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it. The servants, or however, got the word to them, and they come in. And then the rest of verse 7. And it describes them. And they're not described as boys, they're described as men. So the men were grieved, and they were very angry, because he, Shechem, had done the way mine reads is a disgraceful thing in Israel. It's translated as folly, a senseless thing in Israel, by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. That phrase, disgraceful in Israel, is translated as he wrought folly in Israel in the King James Version. But one commentary said that folly had been committed against Israel, not against the father now, although Israel is his name. It's not speaking of just him as an individual now. Now the word or the name Israel is beginning to refer to as the whole family. Because that's the first thing that jumped out at me when I read that, a disgraceful thing in Israel, and I'm like, in Israel?
Mine says family.
It does say family. Jacob's family. That's really good, because it took me a minute on that one. But by saying Israel, we're seeing that the entire family now, not just one person, but the whole family is being referred to as Israel.
Right there just really grabbed me and shown what a difference they considered themselves to be from anyone else.
Yeah.
You know, the Israelites.
Yeah, exactly.
They held themselves in high esteem.
They did.
With every right they should have.
Yeah.
But that comment right there it disgraced the entire family.
Yeah.
For something like that to happen.
Yeah, that's a very important point for us to realize. They did view themselves as different.
Yes.
Apparently, we're not given this anywhere, but you can imagine that it happened that they had been taught or were beginning to be taught about what the covenant was.
It hurt every single one in that family.
Right.
That this happened.
And as God's covenant, they were to be different.
Yes.
They were to be held to a different standard. And then it says, this disgraceful thing in Israel by the line of Jacob started. And then it says, for such a thing ought not to be done.
Never have been done.
Never have been done. Not only in this family, but never to be done in Israel. This remind me, Joe's Uncle Russell, when he didn't like something, he'd say, don't even talk it. It ought not to even be talked. It ought not to even be spoken of.
That so separates them from
everybody. It does.
Really.
Yeah.
Know, everybody that comes along. Actually, they are set aside.
They are set aside, and that's important for us to see. The covenant people were to be different, just like Christians are to be different in their standards of conduct. God lays out plainly in Leviticus 18 that they are to be different from these people that they are going in to live among in this new land, or go back to this land. And perhaps the sons of Jacob were just now beginning to realize how different they were and how different they were to be. They're just beginning to understand that. But now look at verse 8. And I'm going to just kind of tell or paraphrase some of this a little bit, because I can see this in movies I've seen. Hamor spoke with them. The boys have come in. If it's a Western, the horses are all lathered up as they come in. If it's a modern movie, the tires are squealing on the cars as they come in. They come in and they are hot. They are so mad. They are grieved and they are very angry, verse 7 says. And you can imagine Hamor. Now, boys, just settle down here a little bit. Let's just not lose our head. The soul of my son Shechem longs for your Jacob is there as well as the son, for your daughter, your young one in your family. Please give her to him in marriage. And then you'll notice there's no apology.
They're heathens.
Yeah, there's no sympathy. There's no, you know how young people are. The emotions got away from it. No word about it being wrong. Nothing.
Shows how ignorant they were.
Yeah.
To the life.
To that life, exactly. Yeah. To him, it's simply a business transaction. Where the Israelites were angry and appalled, the Canaanites showed indifference. It's no big deal. It's just a little bump in the road. There's nothing wrong with what Shechem did. He saw her, he wanted her, and he took her out. But he loves her. He wants to marry her. And so Hamor lays out the business deal, verses 9 through 12. And he says, now, just, settle down and think this through. Just intermarry with us. You give your young daughters, they'll be future daughters because they don't have any yet, but give your daughters to us, and we'll take our daughter. You can intermarry our daughters for yourself, and you can live with us, or where the word there is dwell. And live safely with us, and the land will be open before you. You can dwell in it. You can buy and sell. You can have businesses. You can do, whatever you want to do. And then Shechem speaks up. That's how we know he's there. And so he turns to the father, to Jacob, and to her brothers, and he says, "If I find favor in your sight," and see if you can picture this. "I'll give you whatever you say to me." And you can imagine wherever the movie is, whatever era the movie is being set in, he brings out a roll of bills that would choke a goat and starts peeling off $100 bills. Or he brings out a money bag and shakes it. Yeah, what's it going to take to make this right? Whatever you say, give it to me. Tell me, and I'll give you whatever. Verse 12, "Ask me ever so much bridal payment and gift, and I will give you according as you say, but give me the girl in marriage." Give me the girl for a wife. One commentary said, this was kind of interesting. One commentary said that the Hivites negotiated in good faith. And I thought, well, whose side are you on?
I think it's like asking the Israelites to come and settle in a hog lot.
Yeah.
These people,
Yeah.
It's just insulting to them.
Yeah. What's it going to cost? Yeah. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And then we see that the apple hasn't fallen very far from the tree of both their father and their grandfather Laban. Look at verses 13 through 17. "But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit." They couldn't. This is what's going through my mind. How did this play out? They couldn't have concocted this plan on the way there because they really don't know the details. They really don't know what's going to happen. This is how I view it. This is just my opinion. This is how I view it. That one of the older ones, maybe Simeon or Levi, maybe even Judah, or let's see, who was the oldest one? Reuben.
The sandwich.
Yeah, Reuben's. Yeah. That's how I remember that. Reuben's sandwich. Reuben's sandwich. He's the oldest. You can imagine one of the older one catches the eyes of the other and gives them some sort of a signal, like, let me handle it. And this is what he said. He answered Shechem and his father with deceit, and he spoke to them. This is what he said. And he said to them, "Well, no, I'm sorry, we can't do this. We can't, there's just this one matter of, we can't give our sister to one who is uncircumcised. We just can't do it. I mean, that would be a disgrace to us. We can't do that. So only on this condition will we consent to it. If you will become like us, if every one of your men, every one of your males will be circumcised. If you're willing to do that, then verse 16, we'll give our daughters, our future daughters to you, and we'll take your daughters for ourselves, and we'll dwell with you. We'll live in peace and safety with you, and we'll all become one people. But if you won't do that, we'll just take her and go."
Do you think they ever imagined that they'd taken up on it?
I don't know.
I mean, that's a big deal.
Well,
you're speaking for all of the
for all the men. It is a big deal, and that was my thought at first until I begin to see that. Let me find my notes. Our immediate thought is, you want us to do what? But no, they say, yeah, we'll do that. But what we have to realize is that circumcision was not an unknown thing. Because by this time, all of the Ishmaelites, we know, were circumcised. Everybody that was in Ishmael's family was. And they did it when the boys were 13 years old. All of Esau's, all the Edomites would have been. So it was something that many others had done. Now, on the one hand, I'm saying, hey, no way. But on the other hand, because it was something that was well known, they didn't recoil at it as much as we might thought they would have. So
I still think that they didn't think they would take them up on that. Because if it was, I mean, it's not something they had done voluntarily.
yeah,
You know, I
Yeah.
mean, if everybody around them were doing it, they still hadn't done
they
it.
still hadn't done it.
Which makes me think it's really a small group of men. I mean, even if the entire group was 70 or whatever, there's a lot of women and children
Of the
of Shechem, you know.
Yeah, of Shechem,
of
yeah.
that tribe.
yeah, that could very well be. It could very well be that
Could
it
be
was
just a small-
Hamor and Shechem and the other sons, however many there were. That's just all there
They could
were.
have had a lot of wives and a lot of children,
Yeah.
you know, that made up.
Yeah,
So there wasn't enough men to really stand up and go, we're not going to do that.
well,
You know,
that even if they had,
out of fear.
out of fear, because verses 18 and 19. The words seemed reasonable to Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. This is the king and the prince, because they have other thoughts in mind. It's like when they start seeing dollar signs or they start seeing what they're going to do, then this maybe in their minds is a small price to pay. Verse 19, and the young man, Shechem, did not delay to do it because he was, it says, delighted with Jacob's daughter. He had a strong, that word delighted means he had a strong attraction. He wanted this young girl.
Mine says desperately.
Desperately. That's a really good point. And then the rest of that verse says, now he was more respected than all the household of his father. The King James says he was more honorable. It doesn't mean that he was a person of honor. The word literally means, the actual word is literally translated as heavy. But what the word means, he had more clout than anybody else. What I think of is the Godfather. What Shechem says goes. It didn't make any difference if they wanted to or not. What Shechem said carried the weight. But the selling point was Shechem said to do it. Plus, they added some potential future financial compensation as well. One commentary said their pain will be their gain. So verses 20 through 24, so Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of the city. Now here's where they have to sell it. Now they've already done it. The father and Shechem have already done it. They stepped up. He did not delay to do it, verse 19. So they did it. So then they come to the gate of the city. And we know the gate is where all the business transactions takes place, where like the city council meets. It's where everything of importance is done. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of the city and spoke to the men of the city, saying, now here's where they are deceitful. These men are peaceful or friendly with us. Therefore, let them live or dwell peacefully in the land, and let them trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them. And now here's the kicker. Only on this condition will the men consent to live with us and to become one people. Every male among us must be circumcised, as they are circumcised. But then here's the selling point. Will not Now this is entirely different from what Shechem had told Jacob and his sons. What he tells his own people is, will not their livestock and their property and their animals be ours? We'll get rid of them, and everything they own will be ours.
Can't you just say winking?
Yeah, it'll all be ours.
So did they basically not have flocks or anything like
They
that?
did. They did, but of course, Jacob was very rich. Yeah,
The more
always want more. Jacob was very rich.
But if they were more urban type people.
Yeah, but they may have not had as many, but they will. Well, we know that they have many things because of what the spoils that they get in the rest of the chapter. But everything that they have will be ours. Only let us consent to them, and they will live with us. And all who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, and all who went out of the gate of this city. Whether they wanted to or not, I don't think they had a choice. I think, like I said earlier, if Shechem says do it, you do it or lose your life. But then comes the deception. Verses 25 through 29. Now it came about on the third day, when they were in pain, in great pain, that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, this is two full brothers of Dinah's by Leah, so they're full brothers, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword, and my translation says, came up on the city unaware. In other words, they came strolling into the city, maybe twirling their sword around, as they came in, because they knew nobody could do anything. They came upon the city unawares and killed every male. And they killed Hamor, the king, and his son, Shechem, the prince, with the edge of the sword, and they took Dinah from Shechem's house. That's how we know she's been held captive there. They took her out and went. And then the rest of the family, the rest of the brothers, Jacob's other son. Now a lot of the commentaries say, why Simeon and Levi? Why not Reuben and Judah, which were, two older ones? I think Simeon's older than Judah. But anyway, why not Reuben and Judah? Why Simeon and Levi? The thought went through my mind, maybe they drew straws. Who was going to get to do it? But it didn't make any difference who would get to do it, because all of the rest of them, in verse 27, all of the rest of them, half-brothers and all, came upon the slain, and they looted the city because they held the city responsible for defiling their sister. Although Shechem was the one who did it, everybody there was held responsible. They should have spoken up. They should have stopped it from happening. But they held the whole city responsible. They looted the city because the whole city, had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds and their donkeys and that which was in the city. So they had some, at least, flocks and herds and animals, and that which was in the city and that which was in the field. So they had some things in the city, some things out in the field. And they captured and looted all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives, even all that was in the houses. And what we notice about this is that Moses doesn't give any commentary on this. He simply relates the facts. This just chapter in Jacob's life, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, he simply relates the account without comment. Then, likely when the sons returned with all this stuff, all the slaves, the livestock, the possessions, then Jacob spoke up and said to Levi and said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me odious," or stink. You just make me stink among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And my men, being few in number, there's not that many of us, they will gather against me and attack me, and I shall be destroyed, I and my household. Now here, Jacob specifically mentions the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Now we saw earlier that the Hivites were a sector, a portion of the Canaanites who mostly dwelled in city. The Perizzites are a portion of Canaanites who live mostly out in the wild, out in the country, we might say. So basically, what Jacob is saying is, it doesn't matter now where we go to live, whether it's in the city, whether it's in the country, someone will come against us, because if you look around, boys, there's not many of us. We don't have many men. I'll have to count that up before in the morning. There's not many of us. We will be in danger of all the Canaanites. So let me just throw this quick sidebar in here. This incident in this chapter is beginning to set the stage for the reason that God will take the Israelites to Egypt. If you remember back in chapter 15, God prophesied to Abraham. He's promised him all this land. This is going to be yours. This is your inheritance. But he prophesied to Abraham that your seed, your descendants, will be held captive by another people. It doesn't say who they're going to be. We know it's going to be Egyptians, but he doesn't tell Abraham. But they will be held captive. I forget how it puts it. For the fourth generation or something. Anyway, however it puts it, they'll be there for a long time. Then they will come back to this land. If they had stayed there as 70, even as they are when they go down to Egypt, as 70 people, less than 100 people, they could have never survived among all these Canaanites, the ones in the cities, the ones in the country. They were taken, and I've often referred to it this way, they were put in an incubation period in Egypt until they grew into a mighty nation. They could have never fought off the Canaanites, the Hivites, all the ones that they would have had to fight as such a small group of people. God had to put them somewhere that they would be, it ended up being bad slavery, but it was not that way for a long time. They simply lived there in Egypt for a long time as they multiplied and grew. It wasn't until they were growing into such a huge number of people that the Pharaoh began to get concerned.
They had such a good life, they were growing in them.
Exactly. They had no reason to want to come back to a hard way of life until it got harder by being there. But God put them in that place to where they could grow safely. And then God made it hard enough on them that they would want to come out. But at the time of the famine, as we said, there will only be 70 people. Think of how few they are now, as we said before, without their wives for their sons. But here we are reading this along as the history of Israel. We've been reading about Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we're just reading the history along, We're just seeing chapter follow chapter. But as we got to remember, Moses is writing this down. Moses is relating this to that million plus several million member Israelite nation that is camped out on the eastern side of the Jordan River, preparing to go into the promised land. They're hearing this story. If they, as I said a moment ago, if they had stayed there as 70 people, they may not have survived the 450 years or so before they would go back. And so in that, we see God's hand in their protection. This incident, as I said at the beginning, whether it was this incident of Dinah being raped, if it hadn't been this incident, it would have been another attack of some kind. There would have been, they were just too few in number to survive in that land. God gave, as we said many times before, God just gave them their hand. If this is what Jacob wants to stay there, okay, you stay there and see what happens. But this is beginning to set the stage for us to see how God's hand of protection. I've been watching this series of it's a 7-part, I guess you'd call it a mini series. When Joe would go hunting, I'd put one on and watch it. It's called The Winds of War. And it's set in about 1939, in the early days of World War II, just as Hitler's coming to power. Robert Mitchum's in it. Ally McGraw's in it. So, it's a really old set of movies. But Ally McGraw is Jewish. And she falls in love with Jan Michael Vincent, and he is the son of Robert Mitchum in this movie. But how the Jews were being treated in those early days of World War II, how their property was taken away from them, how they actually were in Poland when the first attack, or Ally McGraw and Jan Michael Vincent were in Poland when the first attack against Poland from Hitler happened, and then later how they lined the Jews up and they killed them and threw them into pits. And we watch that, and as horrible as the Holocaust was, we can still see God's hand of provision. A lot of things happened because He allowed them free will. He allowed them, in Jesus' day, He allowed them to reject the Messiah. He didn't make them follow Jesus. God never made them accept Jesus as their Messiah. They had the free will to accept Him or reject Him. And many received Him, many rejected Him. And because they rejected Him, then there was a consequence to that. Just like here, Jacob chose to stay in this place. Should he have gone back to Bethel? Maybe he should have. But God gave him the free will to stay here. And because he stayed here, then there was consequences that came because of this. But then in verse 31, the brothers say to him, well, what do you want us to do? Should he just have treated our sister as a prostitute or as a harlot? What do you think we should have done, Dad? What should we have done? And there's no answer there. We can ask that same question today. After October the 7th, 2023, what did we expect Israel to do when Hamas came in and did what they did? What did you expect them to do? Just say, oh, well, no. They retaliate. Maybe we think they retaliated more than they should have. But what did we expect them to do? And so what should we think about Jacob's sons then, in this chapter, and today? Were they right to retaliate? Should we excuse them because they're Israel? Israel is God's chosen people. As we said at the beginning, did they ever do it completely right? No. All through these 4,000 years, from Jacob's day, Abraham's day, down to our own day, Israel may have been out of God's will. In our studies, particularly when we were studying the prophets, we've seen time after time after time that Israel has been, Judah and Israel, the northern and southern kingdom, but either one, were out of God's will. Manasseh, Hezekiah was one of the best kings they had, and his son Manasseh actually took idols into the temple and set them up. They did horrible things, but they may have been out of God's will many times, but they've never and will never be out of His hand. They are in the land today, mostly in unbelief. Don't want to get into politics, but many of the young Jewish people, I think it was something like 70% of the, I don't know what age they were considering younger, but at least in voting age, 70%, I think I read, of the young Jewish voters in New York voted for the Muslim mayor. And he has said he wants Israel destroyed. What were you thinking?
Not thinking.
Not thinking. That's exactly right. But they are in the land today. They are in the land that God promised them, but they are mostly there in unbelief. But prophecy tells us they will one day see and accept Jesus as their Messiah and their rightful King. One more thing to note about this chapter is that in this entire chapter, God is never mentioned. Nobody prays. Nobody sacrifices. Nobody goes to the altar and say, God, what would you have us do? How would you have us respond? Nobody, nothing. Nobody sought God's will. Henry Morris said that perhaps Jacob had stayed too long at Shechem, and God let him have his will, and God let him have the consequences that followed. But many of the commentaries said that although we don't have it in Scripture, that after verse 31 of chapter 34, that Jacob did seek the Lord. How do we know that? Because verse 1 of chapter 35 says, Then God said to Jacob, Arise and go up to Bethel and live there and make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. Either Jacob then turned to God and sought him out, which we don't have in the Scripture, but either he did that or God intervened and said, leave that place. We don't know which one it was, but either way, God told him to leave that place. And that's where we'll pick up next time. So, thoughts?
Chapter 49 answers a couple of questions we've had, where Jacob's blessing his sons.
Yeah.
We couldn't understand why Reuben didn't kind of lead that because he's the oldest. Well, because he's unruly as the waves of the sea.
Yeah.
You know, so it kind of gives a little personality traits.
Yeah.
And Simeon and Levi are two of a kind, men of violence.
Yeah.
And he talks about them like, good grief, they weren't just violent.
Yeah.
They were really
violent. You can see that Jacob never forgot what they did. That on his deathbed, he says that about them.
Yeah, and so that kind of describes them as to who led and why they led.
Yeah.
You know, the way they did. But
yeah, and as we'll see later, there's another chapter thrown in there later it seems like an out-of-place chapter of something that some of the other sons do. So, yeah.
Father can only do so much about teaching his sons.
That's exactly right. Anything else? Or any other thoughts?
A couple of weeks ago, I think when Dinah was first mentioned, I started trying to find out all I could about her. It's not that much, but she is last mentioned in something I read that she was in when they were leaving in 46th chapter when they went to Egypt.
Oh, she's mentioned there?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I think that I don't know how many years from that to that.
Yeah.
Was, but she was mentioned.
I think it's about 12 years after after Joseph is taken. And so that, I don't know how many years is that from this, but yeah. Yeah.
And then I found out some stuff about Dinah in the Civil War, but I didn't say that on tape.
Okay, yeah, we'll talk about that if we turn the tape on. Okay. All right. Anything else? All right, well, let's pray. Father, this is I was just intrigued by this chapter. I just began to